He never expected this moment would change his entire legacy. One ordinary morning, my rich grandfather walked down the same path he always did. Tailored suit, polished shoes, carrying the air of a man who thought he'd seen it all. But just as he passed the alley behind the bakery, a trembling voice stopped him. A homeless man, ragged, hollow-eyed and shaking, stood up and pointed directly at him. "Sir, I found your grandson. He's alive." The air froze. My grandfather's heart skipped a beat. For years we believed he was gone, a tragic accident, a closed case. But that single sentence unraveled everything we thought we knew about our family and ourselves. Enjoy the story. My grandfather, Albert Hargrave, wasn't just rich, he was revered. A former oil magnate turned philanthropist. His name graced hospitals, libraries, even the city park. But for all his wealth and reputation, there was a shadow over his legacy. The mysterious disappearance of his first grandson, my cousin Michael. He was only 9 when he vanished during a family vacation in Maine. A riptide, they said. No body was ever found. My grandfather never spoke of it again. He buried his grief under land acquisitions and board meetings, never shedding a tear in public. But behind closed doors, my father once found him clutching Michael's baseball glove, the old leather worn and trembling in his grasp. That morning had begun like any other. Grandpa's routine was sacred. Early rise, short walk to the cafe. On Fifth, black coffee with a splash of cream. Always the same seat near the window. The locals knew not to disturb him. He wasn't rude, but his presence demanded quiet. That's why, when a disheveled homeless man suddenly stood from the sidewalk and called out to him, it turned every head. "Sir," he shouted, his voice cracked and desperate. Grandpa didn't break stride at first, till the man stepped into his path. "I found your grandson. He's alive." Those words fell like thunder. Time slowed. My grandfather stared at the man, eyes wide, his hand trembling slightly against his cane. "What did you say?" he asked, voice barely audible. The homeless man, whose name we would later learn was Victor, repeated it with more urgency. "I saw him. I swear to God, he's alive. I talked to him just 2 nights ago at the shelter near Riverside." A chill ran through Grandpa's spine. For years, there had been false alarms, charlatans chasing reward money, but something in Victor's voice, his trembling sincerity, the tears in his eyes felt different. He wasn't asking for money. He was begging to be believed. "He said his name was Michael Hargrave," Victor added, pulling a folded piece of notebook paper from his coat. "He gave me this. He told me to find you." My grandfather took the paper with shaking hands. As he unfolded it, his breath caught. Inside was a child's drawing of a boy on a beach, holding a baseball. Cliff, and in the corner, scrawled in crude handwriting, were 3 haunting words: "I miss you." The world seemed to tilt. My grandfather, the man who had stared down corporate titans and negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching, now looked like a ghost of himself. His hands clutched the drawing so tightly the edges began to crumple. That baseball glove, it wasn't just any glove. It was the same one Michael had with him the day he disappeared. Grandpa had gifted it to him a week before the trip, customized with his name stitched in gold thread. And now here it was drawn from memory. It seemed with that exact glove held in a boy's hand, staring out toward the ocean. Grandpa didn't speak. He simply turned to Victor with a haunted look and said, "Where is he?" Victor hesitated, clearly overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. He scratched his beard, eyes darting nervously toward the sidewalk like he half expected someone to interrupt this surreal encounter. "He comes and goes," Victor muttered. "Doesn't stay in one place too long. Says he doesn't trust people. Talks like someone who's seen bad things." He paused, then added, "But he's not crazy. Sharp kid. Said you used to call him Champ." That word broke something in my grandfather. Tears, long buried, welled up and spilled down his cheeks. People on the street began to watch, some pulling out phones, but he didn't care. This wasn't just a public scene, it was a resurrection. Grandpa reached into his coat, pulled out a card, and handed it to Victor. "You find him again. You call me, day or night. I'll come myself." Victor nodded, still stunned. "He's scared," he whispered. "He doesn't remember everything, but he remembers you." Grandpa placed a hand on Victor's shoulder and said something I never thought I'd hear from a man like him. "Thank you for not letting him vanish again." That night, everything changed. My father got a call. I got a call. The staff was alerted, the driver put on notice. Grandpa locked himself in his study for hours, holding that drawing, staring into the past. He had buried hope for so long, it no longer felt safe to believe. But deep inside, something had shifted. For the first time in 2 decades, he let himself ask the question, what if he's really out there? The very next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Grandpa ordered the driver to take him to the shelter near Riverside. He didn't wake anyone, didn't alert the press, didn't even take his assistant, just him and the drawing, folded neatly in his breast pocket. The city looked different that day. Gritty, grey, distant. For a man used to private jets and marble floors, the shelter's cracked pavement and the faint scent of mildew were worlds away. Yet he didn't flinch. When he arrived, the volunteers recognized him instantly. He was, after all, one of the biggest donors to the city's homelessness programs. But this time, he wasn't there as a benefactor, he was there as a grandfather. He asked for Victor. The staff told him Victor hadn't returned that night. Sometimes he disappears for a few days, one of them explained, but he always comes back. Grandpa left his personal number and sat on the worn bench outside, waiting. Hours passed. Morning turned to noon, noon to late afternoon. Still, he waited. For once in his life, he didn't try to control time, he submitted to it. And then, just as he was about to leave, a boy walked out from the alley beside the building. Thin, wild-haired, with clothes too big for his frame. He looked about 20, but carried the eyes of someone much older. My grandfather stood there. Eyes met. The boy froze. Grandpa took a slow step forward. Michael. The boy's eyes widened. His lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked ready to run, but something held him there. Maybe it was the way Grandpa said his name. Or maybe it was the way he said the next word, champ. That one word cracked the wall. The boy stumbled forward, his face a storm of disbelief, fear, and something deeper, recognition. You remember me? He asked, barely a whisper. Grandpa reached into his pocket and pulled out the drawing. I never forgot you. The boy stared at the paper like it was a mirror to another life. I drew that, he said. I didn't think you'd ever see it. Grandpa knelt slowly, tears returning, voice trembling. I've been waiting to see you for 20 years. They stood in silence for a long moment, surrounded by the distant traffic and muffled voices of the city, but to them, it was like the world had gone still. Michael's eyes flicked from the drawing to Grandpa's face, then back again. I thought you forgot me, he said quietly. Everyone forgot. His voice was fragile, like paper on the verge of tearing. Grandpa gently shook his head. No, son, not a day went by. His hand moved to Michael's shoulder, but the boy flinched, instinctively recoiling, as if touch itself had become a threat. It was a heartbreaking signal. This wasn't just a reunion. It was a revelation of wounds still open, scars still raw. Whatever Michael had lived through, it had hollowed something inside him. Grandpa didn't press. He stood back, giving the boy space, and gestured to the bench. Sit with me. Michael hesitated. His eyes darted to the shelter doors, to the street, to the exit routes he had memorized from years of survival. But then, he nodded. They sat side by side, 2 generations separated by decades of silence and mystery. Grandpa didn't ask questions right away. He didn't interrogate. He just talked about baseball, about how Michael's glove was still in the study, about the day he taught him to ride a bike in the driveway back in Texas. Slowly, like ice, melting under sun, Michael's shoulders began to drop. He wasn't smiling, not yet, but he wasn't running anymore. And then Michael spoke. I remember the water, the waves pulling me. I couldn't scream. I thought I died. He paused, swallowing hard. But I woke up somewhere else. Someone found me, took me. I don't remember everything, just flashes. I tried to come back, but his voice broke. I didn't think anyone wanted me. Grandpa leaned forward, his hand gently brushing the edge of Michael's. You're wanted. You've always been wanted. For the first time, Michael looked directly at him. No fear, no doubt, just years of longing packed into one stare. Are you really my grandfather? He asked, and without hesitation, Grandpa nodded. Yes, and if you let me, I'd like to bring you home. Michael didn't answer right away. He sat with his hands clenched tightly in his lap, shoulders tense as if bracing for an invisible blow. The word home had clearly triggered something. For most people, home was a place of warmth, of safety, But for Michael, it was a ghost, a place he once belonged but had been ripped away from. He looked down at his shoes, scuffed and mismatched, and said softly, "I don't even know what that means anymore." My grandfather's throat tightened. He had prepared himself for rejection, for anger, even for the possibility that Michael would turn away. But nothing could have prepared him for the quiet heartbreak in that sentence. Still, he didn't give up. "It can mean whatever you want it to mean," Grandpa said. "It's not a mansion or a name carved in stone. It's me. It's us. It's your seat at the table still waiting for you." Michael's eyes began to well with tears, but he blinked them back. "Why didn't you look for me?" The question landed like a gut punch. My grandfather closed his eyes, exhaling sharply. "We did. We searched for years. Police, private investigators, search teams, but they all said the ocean took you. I was told to accept it, to grieve." He paused, voice breaking. "But I never did. I kept your room exactly the same. He just didn't know how to keep looking without losing my mind." Michael's defenses began to crumble. "I always hoped someone would come, but after a while, I stopped hoping. I got used to being invisible." Grandpa turned to him, his voice suddenly firm with emotion. "You're not invisible to me, never were. Come with me, even just for a few days. No pressure, no questions, just a warm bed, a hot meal, and people who love you." Michael didn't respond right away, but he nodded. It was small, barely perceptible, but it was the beginning. My grandfather stood, offered his hand, and for the first time in 2 decades, Michael reached for it, their fingers clasped, bridging the years of absence. It wasn't a full return yet, but it was enough to begin rewriting everything we thought was lost forever. The ride back to my grandfather's estate was unlike anything Michael had ever experienced. He sat quietly in the back of the luxury sedan, eyes darting nervously between the tinted windows and the leather seats, as if every detail was too clean to be real. He hadn't ridden in a car like this in years, maybe never. Grandpa didn't speak much during the ride. He knew words would only make Michael withdraw again. Instead, he allowed the silence to stretch comfortably between them, like a fragile thread slowly weaving trust. Occasionally, he'd glance over and offer a soft smile. And each time, Michael's expression seemed to soften just a little more. When they arrived at the estate, the gate creaked open as if unveiling a forgotten chapter. The house hadn't changed much: white columns, sprawling gardens, the scent of lavender from Grandma's old flower beds still hanging in the air. But to Michael, it might as well have been another planet. He stepped out cautiously, taking in the manicured lawn, the oak trees lining the driveway, the stone fountain trickling in the center of the courtyard. It was overwhelming. The staff stood by the door, stunned, unsure whether to speak or retreat. No one had seen Grandpa bring someone home like this, not in years. He waved them off gently. His family was all he said. Inside, Michael's eyes wandered. Photographs lined the walls, generations of Hargraves in black and white, sepia and color. Weddings, holidays, fishing trips, birthdays. And then, near the stairs, a single frame that made him stop in his tracks. It was a picture of him, and faded, but unmistakably him wearing the same baseball cap he lost the day of the accident. He stared at it, breath caught. "You kept it," he whispered. Grandpa walked over, voice hushed. "Of course I did." He led Michael to the study, where a fireplace crackled softly, and retrieved the worn baseball glove from the drawer. "I always believed," he said, placing it in Michael's hands, "even when everyone told me to forget." Michael sat in the study holding the glove, as if it were made of glass. His fingers traced the faded stitching where his name had once been embroidered in gold, now worn down to ghostly threads. It was like holding a memory, frozen in time. The weight of it wasn't just physical, it was emotional. A piece of himself he thought had been erased. Grandpa poured 2 cups of hot chocolate from the old kettle, the same one he used to bring out on rainy days when Michael was little. "Still like extra marshmallows?" he asked with a cautious smile. Michael let out a soft, almost involuntary chuckle. "You remember that?" he asked, surprised. "I remember everything," Grandpa replied. The night unfolded slowly. Grandpa gave Michael a tour of the house, showing him the room that had always been his. Nothing had been changed. Same blue walls, same race car bedsheets, same stuffed bear with the fraying ear sitting quietly on the pillow. Michael stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. "I thought you'd have gotten rid of all this." Grandpa shook his head. "I couldn't. It was the only way I kept you close." Michael walked in cautiously, as if afraid touching anything would break the spell. He sat on the bed, running his hand along the old quilt. "I used to pretend this room could fly," he whispered, "like it would take me away from everything." Grandpa smiled, fighting back tears. "Now it brought you back." Later that evening, I arrived at the estate, having driven in from out of town after hearing the impossible news from my father. I hadn't seen Michael since I was a kid, but when I entered the room and saw him sitting there, tired, thinner, older, but unmistakably him, I froze. "Michael," I asked, not believing my own voice. He stood up slowly, eyes wide with cautious hope. "Is that you?" he asked. I nodded, walking over slowly, and then without a word we hugged. A deep, trembling hug that shattered 2 decades of silence. That moment didn't erase what he had been through, but it gave him something he hadn't had in years. A place where he wasn't forgotten. A family that still remembered. That night, something changed in the house. It was subtle, almost imperceptible but real. For years, the mansion had felt like a museum of memories. Beautiful, preserved, but lifeless. Now, it breathed again. As Michael walked the halls, he began to reclaim pieces of himself with each step. He paused at the kitchen doorway, where a growth chart marked our childhood heights on the wall, his name etched in red ink just above mine. He ran his fingers over it and smiled. "I remember trying to cheat this," he said, laughing softly. Grandpa grinned from behind the newspaper. "I let you." We all laughed, and in that laugh was something sacred, something none of us had dared hope to hear again. But joy didn't erase the complexity. That night, while everyone slept, I found Michael awake in the garden, sitting alone under the old willow tree we used to climb as kids. The wind rustled through the leaves like whispers of the past. "Can't sleep?" I asked, approaching quietly. He shook his head. "Too quiet. I'm used to noise. 2 people shouting, 2 sirens." His voice was distant. "Being here, it's like stepping into someone else's dream." I sat beside him. "It's yours too. You know, you belong here." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the depth of the pain behind his eyes. "I'm scared I'll wake up, that this will all disappear." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll keep reminding you it's real." Over the next few days, the transformation was slow but visible. Michael began to eat more, sleep longer, smile more freely. Grandpa arranged therapy sessions, but only with Michael's permission. He didn't push, he didn't force. He simply made space for healing, for processing, for rediscovering who he was outside of trauma. One morning, we found him in the garage, polishing his old bike. "It still works," he said proudly. "Just needs air in the tires." Grandpa chuckled, handing him a pump. "Then let's ride." It wasn't just about bikes or hot chocolate or old drawings. It was about rebuilding trust, one small moment at a time. And in doing so, we all began to heal. Because Michael's return didn't just bring him home, it brought us back to life. But healing isn't linear. And just as things seemed to be settling into something resembling peace, the past knocked. Again, this time not metaphorically. One afternoon, as Grandpa and Michael played chess by the veranda, a black car pulled into the driveway. It was unannounced, unfamiliar, and carried a tension that could be felt before the door even opened. Out stepped a man in a charcoal suit with a briefcase in one hand and a badge in the other. "Mr. Hargrave?" he asked. Grandpa stood, cautious, but calm. "Yes." The man nodded respectfully. "I'm Agent Cole. I work with missing persons recovery and cold case investigations. We need to speak about your grandson." Michael froze. His hand hovered midair above a pawn, eyes wide, jaw clenched. Grandpa stepped in front of him, protective. "He's home now. He's safe." Agent Cole didn't raise his voice, but his tone was grave. "We believe so too, sir. But we have reports that he may have been taken by someone involved in a trafficking ring active in the Northeast 20 years ago. We're trying to identify others who may still be alive." The words hit like ice water. Michael stood up, backing away, face pale. "I don't want to talk about it," he said quickly, voice rising in panic. Grandpa turned to the agent, firm now. "He'll cooperate when he's ready. You don't force someone who just escaped a nightmare to relive it without care." The agent nodded, almost respectfully. "Understood. But when he is ready, we believe his story could help us find others." He handed Grandpa a card and left without pressing further. The house fell into silence once more. But this time, it wasn't the haunted silence of before. It was thoughtful, weighty. Later that night, I found Michael pacing in the hallway. "What if they're still out there?" he asked, fists clenched. "What if others like me are waiting for someone to come for them?" I didn't know what to say, but Grandpa did. He walked over, placed a hand on Michael's shoulder and said, "Then, when you're strong enough, we'll help them together, on your terms, in your time." And Michael nodded, not in fear this time, but with purpose. The following weeks were a slow dance between progress and fragility. Michael began attending therapy sessions regularly, not because anyone forced him, but because, for the first time, he wanted to understand his pain instead of just surviving it. He spoke more openly at dinner, laughed a little louder, and even joined Grandpa on his morning walks around the estate. Still, shadows lingered. Sometimes we'd catch him staring out the window late at night, lost in thought. Other times, he'd flinch at loud noises or disappear into his room without warning. Healing, as we were learning, doesn't erase trauma, it walks beside it, gently, one step at a time. Grandpa, for his part, changed too. He became softer in ways I never thought possible. The man who once ran his life on schedules and profits now paused midday just to sit in the garden with Michael, or cancel meetings to attend therapy, family sessions. He even started cooking again, poorly, I might add, but it made Michael laugh every time he burned the toast. That laugh was a melody we hadn't heard in 2 decades, and we'd do anything to keep it alive. Grandpa also went public, quietly donating millions to shelters and missing children organizations. But without using Michael's name. He's not a news story, he told us. He's a person who's reclaiming his life, not selling it. One evening, Michael stood in the library, surrounded by shelves of old Hargrave journals and books. He pulled one down and opened it. Grandpa's old journal, dated the year after he disappeared. Page after page filled with aching entries. "I dreamed of him again. I heard a boy laugh on the street and almost collapsed. I don't know how to breathe without wondering if he's still out there." Tears rolled down Michael's face as he read. "He never stopped looking for me," he whispered. When Grandpa entered the room minutes later, Michael didn't speak. He simply walked over, arms out, and hugged him, this time without hesitation, without fear. And for Grandpa, that hug was worth more than every dollar he had ever earned, because money could build an empire, but love had just restored his family. Not long after that night in the library, Michael made a decision that surprised all of us. Over breakfast, while Grandpa struggled with the toaster again and I was pouring coffee, he looked up and said, "I want to speak with Agent Cole." The room fell quiet. Grandpa set the plate down gently. "Are you sure?" he asked, careful not to show too much reaction. Michael nodded. "If my story can help someone else, maybe someone still out there like I was, then I have to." There was a calm determination in his voice. It wasn't about reliving the pain, it was about reclaiming it, transforming it. That afternoon, the meeting was arranged, private, discreet, and emotional. Michael sat across from Agent Cole in Grandpa's study. I stayed close, just outside the door, while Grandpa remained within earshot, but out of sight, letting Michael lead the moment. For over 2 hours, he spoke, haltingly at first, then with clarity. He shared memories, the name of the woman who took him in after the waves, the man who moved him from town to town, the church where he was left one winter, the names he'd used over the years to survive. It wasn't just a testimony, it was a map, a breadcrumb trail for investigators who had long been working in the dark. When it was over, Agent Cole sat in stunned silence before finally saying, "You may have just saved lives." That evening, something in Michael seemed lighter. He joined us in the kitchen, helping Grandpa mix ingredients for his famous, almost edible stew. We laughed more that night than we had in weeks. And then, as the sky turned orange with sunset, Michael asked Grandpa if they could visit the beach. "The one in Maine," he said, "where it all happened." Grandpa hesitated, but then nodded. "If you're ready, I'm ready." A week later, we stood on the same shore where, 20 years earlier, the sea had taken him from us. Now, we were back, not to grieve, but to reclaim. Michael walked barefoot into the surf, the waves brushing his ankles, and with his face to the wind, he whispered, "I'm not lost anymore." The beach visit became a turning point, not just symbolically, but emotionally. As Michael stood staring out at the horizon, the wind catching his hair, it was as if he was finally facing the thing that had haunted his dreams since childhood. The water that once swallowed his world now welcomed him gently, like an old friend that had changed. Grandpa stood a few paces behind, watching with cautious reverence. No one spoke for a while, and then Michael turned, walked back toward us, and said something none of us expected. "I think I want to stay, not just for a visit, not just until he figured things out. Stay, as in build, a life not on the streets, not in hiding but right here, among us. Back home." Things began to shift permanently. Grandpa offered Michael a position, helping manage one of the Foundation's outreach programs, the same shelter where Victor had once delivered the drawing. "You've lived what they're living," Grandpa said. "You don't need a degree to make a difference. You just need a voice that understands." Michael was hesitant at first. "What if I'm not strong enough?" But Grandpa placed a hand on his shoulder and answered, "You already proved you are." With time, Michael accepted, and as the weeks turned into months, his presence began to transform not just the Foundation, but the people it served. Survivors came forward, stories were shared, connections were made, all sparked by one broken boy who refused to stay invisible. Victor returned to the shelter weeks later, unaware of the impact he'd had. When Grandpa saw him, he embraced him without hesitation. "You didn't just save a boy," Grandpa said. "You saved this family." Michael approached, holding a new pair of boots and a folded set of clothes. "For you," he said to Victor, "so you can stay warm this winter." Victor's eyes filled with tears. "You're alive," he said, voice cracking. "I told myself maybe I'd imagined it, but here you are." They hugged two men who had nothing in common but pain, and yet everything in common through healing. That moment wasn't just closure, it was a new beginning. Because Michael wasn't just found, he was finally home, and for the first time in 20 years, so were we all. As the seasons changed, so did Michael. The shy, hollow-eyed young man who once flinched at every sound was now standing in front of crowds, speaking calmly, powerfully, from lived experience. Grandpa helped him launch a new initiative within the Foundation called the Lost Voices Project, aimed at reconnecting missing persons with their families. Michael wasn't just a survivor anymore, he had become a guide for others still. Walking through the dark, his story, once too painful to speak aloud, was now a lifeline for those who felt forgotten. And with each story that came in, each missing person found, the guilt that once haunted our family began to lift. But even amidst the new light, Grandpa knew there was still a final piece missing: the full legal reinstatement of Michael's identity. Bureaucracy doesn't move at the speed of miracles, and legally, Michael had been declared deceased for nearly 2 decades. With a team of lawyers, Grandpa began the process to reverse that status, and I'll never forget the day the judge finally banged the gavel. Michael James Hargrave is hereby recognized as alive. The courtroom erupted in applause, not because of the law's acknowledgement, but because it felt like the universe itself had corrected a mistake. Grandpa wept openly in that courtroom, holding Michael's birth certificate like a sacred relic. "You're back," he whispered, "officially, fully, forever." That evening, we threw a celebration at the estate, not a gala, not a press event, just a gathering of those who mattered most. Michael stood by the fireplace, a quiet smile on his face, watching Grandpa tell old stories to the guests, with a glass of scotch in hand. I walked over and asked him, "Do you ever think about what might have been, if none of this had happened?" He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Sometimes. But then I remember, I might have missed out on pain, but I would have missed out on this too." He looked around at the people laughing, hugging, living, this love, this redemption, ... I wouldn't trade it for anything. And in that moment, I realized, sometimes, the greatest stories begin where we thought they had ended. Months passed, and the home that once echoed with silence had become a place of constant movement, laughter, and warmth. Michael had not only reclaimed his place in the family, he had reshaped its very core. Grandpa, now slowing down with age, often sat in the garden with Michael by his side, watching birds gather near the fountain, or reminiscing about days long gone. "You know," Grandpa said one afternoon, "I used to sit here wondering what I'd say if I ever saw you again." Michael turned to him, curious. "And what did you come up with?" Grandpa smiled gently. "Exactly what I said the day you came back. I never stopped believing." And they both laughed, because, by then, the words didn't need to be profound, they had lived them. But not every moment was serene. One day, a letter arrived. It was from someone claiming to have known Michael during the years he was missing. Enclosed was a photograph. Michael, as a teenager, standing in a group of other children, all with the same distant, hollow stare. On the back, written in slanted cursive, "I told you I'd find you again." Michael went pale. His hands shook. Grandpa immediately ordered the security team to tighten all surveillance around the estate. "We're not going backwards," he said firmly. "You're safe now." But the letter sparked something deeper: questions, unresolved stories, faces from the past that might still be trapped in the darkness Michael had escaped, rather than hide. Michael made a decision that stunned even Grandpa. "I want to go public," he said. "Not for attention, for awareness." He scheduled an interview with a journalist known for exposing human trafficking networks. The story aired across national platforms. Michael didn't use names. It didn't point fingers, but his face, his voice, his truth, they couldn't be ignored. Tips poured in. Investigations reopened. Survivors called in crying, thanking him. "I thought I was the only one," one woman said. "You gave me the courage to speak." Grandpa watched the coverage from his armchair, eyes misty, whispering, "That's my grandson." And for the first time, not because of wealth or bloodline, but because of something far greater: legacy. The day Grandpa passed, the sky was clear, strangely peaceful, as if the world itself understood something sacred had reached its conclusion. He died in his sleep, in the very study where he had once clutched a child's drawing with shaking hands and a trembling heart. But he didn't die grieving. He died full of joy, full of pride, full of the quiet peace that comes when you know your story didn't end in tragedy, but in redemption. Michael was the one who found him that morning. He didn't cry right away. He just knelt by the chair, placed a hand on Grandpa's chest, and whispered, "I'm home now. You can rest." The funeral was unlike any other. It wasn't a somber affair, but a celebration, a full-circle moment where friends, family, and even strangers gathered, not just to mourn, but to thank a man who refused to let a grave define his grandson's fate. Michael delivered the eulogy. He stood tall, his voice steady, and said, "This man saved my life. Twice. Once, when I was a boy, and again when I was ready to be found." There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel, not because of the death, but because of the life that had been lived with such purpose, such courage, and such unbreakable love. In the weeks that followed, Michael took up Grandpa's seat at the head of the foundation, not because of inheritance or pressure, but because the mission had become his own. He expanded the outreach programs, built shelters in Grandpa's name, and continued giving voice to the voiceless. I still visit the estate often. Sometimes I find Michael sitting under the old willow tree with a notebook in hand, sketching waves, gloves, or just watching the wind. And every time I ask him what he's thinking, he says the same thing: how lucky I was to be found. But the truth is, we were the lucky ones, because Michael didn't just come back, he came back with light enough to illuminate every corner of a past once lost to darkness. And that is the kind of story that never truly ends.